you and I are going to be successful as Christians, one of the things that we need to learn to beat in our life is discouragement. It's just very, very difficult. I would even say probably impossible to live a godly Christian life for any period of time without going through a time period when things just aren't going right. You know, where the bills pile up or everything seems to break or people turn against you or all of those things and more. And we can become very discouraged during those times. And there's kind of a Christian myth out there that if you're walking the Christian walk, if you're obeying God, if you're doing God's will, that things will go well for you. It's amazing to me that myth exists, frankly, because, you know, you look at the Apostle Paul, we're going to have a really hard time finding people that are more godly than the Apostle Paul, and yet, you know, you look at his life. He was whipped, he was beaten, he spent time in jail, he was shipwrecked. He said he was in hunger and thirst and nakedness in times. I mean, he went through amazing hardships, and the strong Christians I know who are really trying to do something go through hard times too. And during those hard times, it's easy to become discouraged. And what we need to know is that if we will pray and read the Bible and be faithful to do the things we know to do as Christians, God will bring us through those periods of discouragement. It doesn't mean that there won't be periods when things will go wrong. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about God bringing you through by making everything go right again. I'm saying God brings us through our discouragement by figuring out ways to encourage us. You know, even the best, even the strongest of God's people have been profoundly discouraged at times. I mean, if we thought through the Bible and said, okay, who are some of the great men and women of God? Can we do much better than Moses? I mean, Moses was such a powerful person. But you think about it. When he was 40 years old, he tried to deliver the children of Israel. He tried to bring them out of Egypt, and he ended up killing an Egyptian. The Egyptians ended up finding out about it, and instead of delivering the children of Israel and leading them out of bondage, he had to run away. And he spent 40 years as a shepherd in Midian. Hot days, cold nights, pretty discouraging time period for a very long time. And so when God came to Moses again, he's now 80 years old. He really hasn't had much of a relationship with God for 40 years in the sense of an active, aggressive relationship. I'm sure his faith was intact. But as far as God asking him to do anything, so here now at 80 years old, God shows up in the burning bush and talks to Moses. And here's what he says. This is Exodus chapter 3, verse 10. Now go. Here is God speaking to Moses out of a bush. Pretty profound experience. I mean, come on now. If you were walking by a bush and it burst into flames and started talking and identified itself as God, and God said, do something, do you think you might do it? Here's God. He appears to Moses in the burning bush. He says, now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people to the Israelites out of Egypt. And what does Moses say? Great, finally you've showed up. I'm going to go. No, that's what he doesn't say, because he's been discouraged. And this is the power of discouragement. And you and I need to be aware of the debilitating effect of discouragement. And we need to be aware of how to get ourselves out of it. And we need to be aware that it happens to all godly people. It's something that life beats up on us and we become discouraged at times. So in verse 11, instead of saying to God, yay, finally I'll go, Moses said to God, who am I? Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh? I'm a shepherd. I've been a shepherd for 40 years. I'm a shepherd. I'm a dad. I live here in Midian. Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh? Didn't feel that way 40 years before, but he sure felt that way now. What's fascinating to me is God's answer to this. God's answer is not, who are you? I'll tell you who you are. You were raised in Pharaoh's household. You're you're this, you're that. Here's what God said. Verse 12. I will be with you. You know, there's so many times that you and I get discouraged because we think, who am I to do what you're asking me to do? And the real answer from God is, I'm going to be with you. Let me tell you, if God is leading you to do something and he's with you in it, your qualifications, you got qualifications. God just qualified you. If God and you are going to do something together, you're qualified, absolutely. Well, did that break Moses out of his discouragement? No. He said to God in verse 13, suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what's his name? So here's Moses. You know, I don't even know your name. You can just hear the discouragement in his voice. What's his name? So God now goes on this huge talk with Moses. I mean, look at the intimate communication there. God working with Moses to bring him up and out of his discouragement. There's this huge discussion in the midst of which God says, this is great. God says in the midst of this huge discussion, or not even a discussion, this great talk from God's standpoint, in verse 18, God happens to mention, by the way, the elders of Israel will listen. And then he goes on and keeps talking. So now we get to chapter 4, verse 1. And Moses answered, what if they don't believe me or listen to me? So Moses, look what discouragement does. It turned Moses so inside, he wasn't even hearing what God said. God said, when you do this, they will listen. And here's Moses, right after God says it, turning back to God and saying, what if they don't believe or listen? You can just see God going and pulling out his God hair, going, what is going on down there? He's not even hearing me. But that's what discouragement can do. Discouragement can close our minds to possibilities. So God gives Moses some miracles to do. You know, throw your stick on the ground, it becomes a snake. Put your hand in your shirt, it turns leprous. God says, okay, I'll give you some signs so that they'll listen. So now Moses, you know, God's going to be with them, and the people are going to listen. And so Moses, what's he say in verse 10? He says to Yahweh, it's chapter 4, verse 10, oh Lord, I've never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since you've spoken to your servant. I'm slow of speech and slow of tongue. I'm not eloquent is a good way to understand it, to translate it. Moses wasn't saying he stuttered or he had a speech problem. He's got to present himself in Pharaoh's court. And then he's got to lead like 3.5 million Israelites. And he just says, I'm just not eloquent. I can't motivate people like that. He's just discouraged and he's turned inward. And so the Lord said to him, who makes man's mouth? And Yahweh convinced him that, you know, look, you'll be able to speak and do this. And so Moses' excuses were kind of swept away. And so in verse 13, Moses said, oh Lord, please send someone else to do it. And that's kind of the bottom of discouragement. But the bottom of discouragement, I don't even want to do it anymore. I'm not interested. Just send someone else. Why do we see this in God's word? Because I'll tell you, if Moses got this discouraged, and look what he did. He went back into Egypt. He delivered the children of Israel. He marched them around the wilderness for 40 years. He was the quintessential leader. My goodness, if Moses can go from that far down to that far up, then there's hope for any of us. Absolutely. There's no need for us to stay in discouragement. Discouragement can be very debilitating. But if we're willing to do what it takes to hang in there with God, God will break through our discouragement, and the kind of the dark night of the soul will go away, and we'll find that we're doing great things for God and we're excited about it. So if you're discouraged today or disencouraged, it's a time to know, hang in there. God will work with you like Moses. You will see victory. God bless you.